Yeah, so while we're settling down here, it's a good time to mention that we have a group of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds listening today from Country Day Montessori in Raleigh, North Carolina, including my son Towns. Hi, guys. I know these guys are big Okeanos fans, and so they're going to be really excited to see what kind of fascinating deep-sea creatures we see down here.
And it's really good timing because we're just seeing the bottom coming into view now at a depth of 2,152 meters, 2 kilometers deep.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you guys have some questions, you can pass them along here, and if we get a chance, maybe we'll answer them.
Looks like we have a mixture of exposed rock and sediment. Fish. We're seeing that there's already several cucumbers, sea cucumbers, excuse me, down here on the bottom.
Cucumbers, that would be exciting.
I'm dreaming of fresh salads. So the process during these dives, we have the ship has been achieved a location such that it works with the direction that the winds are blowing and the currents are moving, which is no easy feat, while the ROVs are being lowered down on a cable from the back of the ship, and we kind of move and drift into position so that we intersect the bottom at the place that we were hoping to begin. And so we're just getting down on the bottom, and now the pilots are making sure that the 2 ROV systems are in a good configuration so that we can begin our move back up the slope.
That's right, and if you looking at camera 2, you can see the view down from the upper ROV, Sirius, which has some lights on it that are illuminating the surface. And if you're looking at camera 1, then you're seeing the view from Deep Discover, our D2, which is down the robot down on the seafloor. And it's going to take these close-up photos, and it can also take samples for us of rocks and biology. We're seeing some interesting stuff right here already.
Yeah, there's plenty of biology in the location we settled in, and I'm wondering, are these anemones, or now I know that there's solid sea cucumbers that attach to the side of rock. I have to be careful.
That's right.
Before we zoom in. And I think maybe even a black coral up on the top of the rock. So absolutely. Let's start right in the center there, those white dots on the face of the rock. And then I wonder if that may be a pom-pom anemone just below it. Actually, less sediment, Del, than I thought there was going to be here.
Yeah, I thought we'd catch a little more at the base here as well. So.
All right, so this is a little bit unusual. So we're seeing a cluster of sea anemones here, acting in the area. And you can see that these are all fairly large polyps. I noted if we can just get the lasers there a second. Thank you. There's the lasers. So those 2 laser dots, these are lasers being projected from the ROV. They give us scale. So those are 10 centimeters apart, approximately 6 inches or so. And so that's telling us that those anemones are maybe 3 to 4 centimeters across, so a couple of inches wide at the oral disc. You can see the little slit in the center, that's the mouth, and they have a ring of tentacles that they capture their food with, maybe small crustaceans or whatever they can get, and they ingest them. And it seems like this is a good place to live because they've reproduced and spread, and you can see several of the same species. Thank you, pilot. There's a brown, perhaps anemone, just in front of this rock, a little bit lower down from where we're looking.
Yeah, I can really see them moving around there. Gives an indication of why they're here. Lots of nice current. That's also why there's probably no sediment. You can see it moving past.
So we have a north to south current. Most of these animals that we'll be looking at that are living on the bottom are dependent on their food that's floating in the water. And so they like to live in places where the water flow is strong enough that it's carrying enough food particles, but not so strong that they get ripped right off the rock. There's a kind of a happy medium there. Pilot, did you copy? I'm looking. No worries. No problem. If you could zoom out, there's a brownish anemone in the foreground on the sediments. There's a couple of shrimp there as well.
Oh, May 10th, National Shrimp Day.
Oh, very good.
Been waiting.
That will make Amy happy. There we go. So you can see that this is a different species of anemone. There's also a group of animals that are closely related to anemones, to sea anemones, but they're not. They're called corallomorphs or corallomorpharians. And one of the characteristics of them is that they have these white knobby tentacles, or at least some of them do. Now, the problem is, so do some anemones. And from this particular perspective, I can't tell the difference. But we'll record that this is a different sea anemone. Thank you, pilot. Looks like it has a couple of... I'm happy with that. At this angle, we're not going to get too much more information. I do see there's a couple of amphipod crustaceans, small shrimp-like crustaceans sitting on a couple of tentacles. That's a good view. So on the rock, there's a couple of things, pilot. There's a sea cucumber to the left, and there will be a coral, black coral on the top. Whatever one is more convenient for you to image first. Yeah, it's on the very top of this feature, both of them. The coral will be almost directly above that patch of anemones. Oh, yeah, thank you. That's good. Let's do that. Oh, great. Yes, absolutely. So Chris Kelly from the University of Hawaii, who is a bit of an expert in the sponges, can tell us about this sponge. And then actually we have something quite different behind it. But Chris, if you'd like to tell us about this sponge.
Yeah, sure, Scott. So my best guess is that this is a glass sponge, and it's in the family Rosellidae, and it's one of the stocked roselids, and I think it's in the genus Calophacus. So glass sponges are characterized by having siliceous microscopic parts. That means they're made of silica, and it gives them that glassy appearance. This group is not very well described, and Dr. Henry Ricewig, that is a Calophacus genus, is not very well described, and Dr. Henry Ricewig up in Vancouver is working on the Calophacus right now, trying to get some names to a lot of these species. But it's a fairly common sponge that you find at, below 1,000, 2,000 meters depth.
Thank you, Chris. Just behind it on the rock, you see those two things that look like mini candelabras. Those are probably bryozoans, sometimes called moss animals. I think that's a good view of the sponge when video is happy. Okay, further to the right, if we can just pan to the right, we're passing over a feather star there, but keep going. Well, we can have a quick look, but keep going. There's going to be another stocked animal. And I believe this is a stocked tunicate. Yeah, there it is. Huh. And a tunicate is known, the shallow water ones are known as sea squirts. And so if you've been down to the seashore and seen these kind of ugly, warty looking things and you push them, they'll squirt a little jet of water. That's because they're closing up their siphons. So this is a version that lives on a very long stalk. I believe it's in the genus Coolius. I'm probably mispronouncing that incorrectly.
Have we seen this particular species before on this expedition?
It was the first or second dive we saw something like this, and I didn't recognize it at the time. I thought perhaps it was a sponge. It was really covered in sediments. This one is much, much clearer. You can see there's a couple of openings at the two different ends. It'll draw water in one end, filter it. There's actually inside of that structure that you see that looks kind of like a basket, you see the brown sort of S-shaped curve. One end of that is the mouth, and that's actually an intestine and a stomach. And this is an invertebrate that's very closely related to the vertebrates. This is probably the nearest cousin to the vertebrates in terms of the invertebrates. Thank you for that. We have a good idea on that.
And of course, we're getting a good view of these manganese crests that Chris mentioned earlier. And these really like to form on the slopes of these seamounts where we've got the sediment being moved away. And this is a great example of it here already on the bottom.
So Nav is asking a good question. What were the round structures that were inside that? And had I described it already? And I hadn't, because I didn't know what they were. So it could be that they were eggs, something reproductive. I don't believe that it was something that it had captured. But I'm not entirely sure, and I want to go back to the video and study that sometime later. Go ahead, pilot. Okay.
Okay.
No problem.
Yeah.
A snap zoom will do, as you noted. We believe you already know the genus Bathypathes. Good call on that. So just a quick view. We'll see if it's got a polychaete there, and then we can move on.
Yeah, Bruce is asking about the animals being blown by the wash of the ROV or the currents, and almost certainly the currents here. The pilots are reporting strong currents.
So this is a black coral in the genus Bathypathes, and I do see about the third branch down from the top. You can see there's a little kind of grayish blue something in there, and that's a polychaete worm. It's a scale worm. This is one of the things that we do the close-ups for. Tim Shank had noticed earlier, are there associates that are living on the corals? And one of the main objectives of the Capstone project is to understand what sort of communities that we see at different depths, and how communities, especially that are dominated by sponges and corals, are contributing to the diversity by having other animals live on them. And that's a really good example right there. Thank you, pilot. I noted as we were zooming in here that beyond this rock up to the right, I think there's another species of black coral, kind of yellowish in appearance. And it might have been, yeah, that might be a Stauropathes, which I don't believe we've actually seen on this expedition yet.
There's also a bluish object on the left center
Understood,
of the
pilot.
screen on a rock face that might be a holothurian or something.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I think that is a holothurian, and right now I'm not sure the position if we can get over there to look at, but we saw in descending there were a lot of sea cucumbers in this area. So indeed, this is another black coral, and so one thing that may be interesting to those of you listening, I just identified two black corals, neither of which were black. So why are they getting that name? If you look right at the base of the rock where this thing is attaching, you notice a slightly brighter black color, and that's the internal skeleton. There's a little bit of tissue peeled away there. So they get their name because of the black skeleton. But you can see they can have a variety of colors of tissue. The branching pattern of this one, I know that this belongs to the genus Stauropathes. Thank you, pilot. No associates on that particular colony. So all the black corals have an internal skeleton made of protein that is black, and very, very spiny. If you were to run your fingers around it or over it, it would feel very much like a very strong sandpaper. Spines aren't typically big enough to puncture you or anything like that, but you can definitely feel it. Copy that, pilot. Okay. We're seeing plenty of things. Oh, wow, look at this. Yeah, so there's going to be plenty on this dive, I can tell already. I believe we're about to have a close-up look at a bubblegum coral that is being overgrown by a yellow zoanthid. So this is a type of octocoral. So different, quite a different group, actually, from the black corals that we've just imaged. Those black corals are actually very close relatives of the anemones that we saw first. and they're less closely related to the coral next to it. So that can be a little bit confusing. We have these things that are generally called corals, but in terms of their relationships, their evolutionary relationships, they're actually sprinkled all over the Cnidarian clade. So indeed, this is something that we see quite often, this association. So the pink or red that you're looking at is an octocoral called a bubblegum coral. And the yellow is a colonial anemone. It's called a zoanthid, and it's overgrowing the underlying coral. And both of these animals, the coral and the zoanthid, are getting their food from the water column. So it benefits that zoanthid by growing up and over this coral. But I think you'd have to call this a parasitic relationship. That zoanthid is basically a parasite on this coral. I mean, it's overgrown it so much that many of the coral polyps aren't showing. Then the other thing you're seeing in the arms of the coral is a brittle star. And you can see that's the other sort of snaky-like thing that's winding through the branches. And these brittle stars are also known as serpent stars or snake stars. And Tim, do you want to say, if you're on the line, do you want to, maybe he had to leave. I know Tim couldn't be here for the first hour or so. But if you are there, Tim, do you want to say anything about the astroschumatid? Yeah, I think he's not on the phone right now. He'll be with us in a couple of hours. But Tim Shank of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has spent quite a bit of time doing research on the relationship of these sea stars to the corals that they're living on to try to determine how close is that association. Can certain kinds of sea star only live on certain kinds of coral? Thank you, Pilot. That's great.
So the kids at Country Day Montessori are asking why we're diving out here in the ocean with a robot.
That is a fantastic question.
It really is. And the whole purpose of what we're doing out here is we're trying to explore. So we're going to places where no one has ever been down to look at the seafloor, and we're trying to see what the geology is like, what kind of rocks are there, understand how this part of the ocean formed, and we're trying to see what kind of life is there.
We have some ideas about the kind of animals that we might expect to see in the deep sea, but we don't know specifically what's going to be in any of these areas where we dive. So there's always surprises in store. We've had some dives on this expedition where we've seen some really interesting, exciting, and surprising behaviors of animals, the things they do, the way they're feeding, the way they're moving, and so on. Here's another great observation, a new one. So this is yet another type of coral. It's called a sea pen. And that's good. So you can see it at the base of it, it's kind of inflated. And it's basically got what's called a peduncle, and it's stuck there in the sediments. So this is a coral that's adapted to live in the soft sediment versus all the other ones that we've seen so far and are attached to that hard rock. So that's a species of sea pen, Penatulacea.
Yeah, we've seen several species of sea pen in this expedition already.
Yeah, and you can see that one has got very big polyps. The polyps are the part that are extending from that stem. And that ring of tentacles they have is what they use to grab stuff out of the water column and feed. And so the pilot notes that it may actually be on a rock, and there's actually one group of sea pens that has adapted to live on the rock, and they turn their peduncle into more like a plunger, I guess.
A suction there,
yeah,
or
like
something?
A bathroom plunger.
Yeah, okay. Versatile.
Exactly. It's not seen among all the sea pens, but it is among some. Yeah, I'm starting to agree with you, Pilot. It looks like there's too much of that peduncle being seen. You wouldn't normally see that much if it was in the sediments. So I think we could call that a rock pen. Thank you. Maybe the genus Calibelemnon. That's a little bit of a guess, but I'm basing it on the fact that the main stem doesn't curve at all and the relative number of polyps and how they arise from that main stem. Another crinoid. That one looks like it's on a sponge. So we're just going to get the D2 ROV kind of in position with respect to the Sirius ROV, so it's in good operational setup. There's a purple sea cucumber here in the foreground, so we haven't had a good look at a sea cucumber today. It's to the right of the lasers. Oh, I didn't see that one.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, you can take either one. Oh, I see. Yeah, so there's a reddish brown one. Looks like two different species of sea cucumber here. We've been fortunate in the last several dives to have Diva Amon with us, who knows a lot about these deep water sea cucumbers. I don't think she's able to be with us today, so we'll have to struggle through with some of the names on our own. Chris Kelly, you want to take a shot at this?
So Chris just stepped out to grab food, so we're going to have to wait a little bit on that.
Probably as soon as he saw these sea cucumbers. So the sea cucumber, Holothurian, is a relative of sea stars and the brittle star that we were just looking at on that last coral. So it's a member of the Echinodermata, means spiny skin. But you can see it seems to be a lot softer than the other ones that we've seen. And it's hard to tell that it has, 5 arms. The sea stars and the brittle stars often have 5 arms. Very easy to identify.
Right.
Well, in fact, this has tube feet in 5 rows going the length of the body. So it's still got that what they call pentaradial symmetry. These are adapted for feeding in the sediments. You can see he's moving his head around there. Might be looking for sediments or trying to hold on to the bottom. You can see the tube feet sticking off the bottom that it uses to kind of suction itself in place. That's a good view, thank you. So we'll get a look at a second species here, and you can see how much they can modify basically how the podia on the dorsal side, basically the side that we can see up on top, can be modified in a different species. And I'm not entirely sure what the function of those structures are that are sticking up, but in some you see they are almost covered in what looks like long tendrils or hairs, and others are very smooth. So I think the one we're going to look at here is much smoother, fewer of these modified podia on the dorsal surface. Bruce Monday, thank you, is passing on that this may be the genus, the one we just looked at, Synallactus, from the family Synallactidae, based on some observations that Diva had in her blog that are on the website. So here again, you can see far fewer of those elaborated tendrils or modified podia sticking off. I'm calling it the dorsal side because it's the side we can see, but if you're a biology student, you would know that that's not truly the dorsal side because of the modifications of the body, but for our purposes, it is the back. You can see it's almost transparent. You can see a bit of a tube-like structure on the inside. That's the guts that you're looking at right there, and they are colored kind of golden yellow because it's packed with sand. It's feeding on all this sand that's on the rock and on the bottom, extracting whatever food it can from that sand. Thank you, pilot. There's a very small crinoid there. Okay, I think we're ready to begin our move upslope.
All right, yeah, we're currently at 2,168 meters. And we're going to try to make our way up to about 1,900 meters, sort of on the edge of this kind of flat top seamount that we're on today.
See a couple of a crinoid over there. Oh yeah, there it is, tucked in. So there's a white sea star here, very short arms, tucked into a little nook in this rock here. We'll just get a quick view of it. And this looks to me like something that we would call a slime star. Pterastidae, I believe, is the family, or maybe Mixastridae. Now I'm getting confused. And one of the things that I'm looking at there is kind of they got the short arms, but you see there what looks like a big opening on the top.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm using to describe it. And later on, if we get a good look at these, and maybe Chris Mock can call in and tell us about the amazing biology of those particular sea stars. Thank you. They kind of have a second skin on that upper surface that we're looking at that can be inflated and deflated. And they can be kind of mucousy, which is why they're called a slime star.
I see.
If the preschool is still watching, I know they love things that have a lot of mucus.
They do. I think they've just signed off. It's 5 o'clock there on the East Coast, so
Quitting time.
time to go home. I have a hard day.
Thank you, Astrid. She's reminding me that this slime star is in the Pteraster group, so the Pterastidae. And Astrid and Bruce, our fish biologists on shore, I did notice as we were settling down one fish kind of hovering in the water column. I wasn't sure if it was a synaphobranched eel or something, but I haven't seen any on the bottom. So just to the right of the lasers, there's something kind of pinkish. Looks like it's going to be a Chrysogorgia colony, perhaps. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Good. I just tuned in, and I've been following along on your adventures for a while. Just saw the white hymenaster you were taking a look at there. Good job on reciting the biology of pterasterids.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that my lessons are are being absorbed.
They are being absorbed. They're excellent.
But I did want to... What was that?
I say they are being absorbed. Excellent lessons.
Yes. And so I did want to confirm that what you're seeing there is hymenaster. And it's an interesting white species, which is a little different from the other ones that we've seen so far. I don't know necessarily how important the color is, but we saw a really deep purple one with a very different surface texture. Two different purple slime stars with different kinds of textures on the surface. One seemed to be like a big souffle, and the other one seemed to be more like a prickly scaffolding. So I suspect that there's quite a lot of diversity in these. Like you were talking about how sort of almost every xenophyophore that had been sampled was probably new. I get the impression a lot of these are probably much more diverse than we realize, because a lot of the things that we collect are usually destroyed or damaged by nets, because as you can sort of figure, they're fairly delicate. The bodies are really soft, and they're really difficult to preserve. So it's often difficult to have a specimen to examine for any length of time. But the video is being a tremendous help in understanding how many different types of these animals we're seeing. And I suspect there are not even new species, but different genera, because a lot of times they're just sort of dumped into one genus, hymenaster, because of their general similarity. But my guess is there are probably more. We just have to actually connect all of the evidence together, pictures and specimens. So great to see another one. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. And hopefully we'll see a lot more today as we continue this dive upslope. There were a few fish in the area that I didn't notice, but our biologists on shore are suggesting they saw an eel-like, possibly a halosaur, and a cusk eel. So we'll...
Yeah, I missed them too, I must say, so keep an eye out.
Yeah, I think we see fish pretty often right at the beginning when we're just settling down, and I think that might be because they're avoiding the ROV, but just as we're coming down from the surface, we're kind of catching them by surprise, so we get a chance to see some before they all swim away from us. So I think the beginning of the dive is really important to see if there's fish around.
Thanks, Astrid. And so do you know, is the avoidance a function of the sound that's coming from the ROV or the light that's coming from the ROV?
I think all of it. The ROV can be pretty loud. The prop wash can create turbulence that they can sense with their lateral lines. And then, of course, we're beaming a lot of light down here in a place where there's really no light. So it's pretty,
just at the lasers
for the fish
now.
Anyway, I think it's a big disturbance.
Thank you, Astrid. Looks like 2 black corals here. They're just a little bit taller, and the branchings, what are called pinnules, those side branches, seem all about the same length. Just have a quick image of this to see if later on we can compare it to the images from the first one we saw and see if these are different species. But it's definitely a black coral. And to echo what Chris was just telling us about the sea stars and how hard it is to identify them just from video, and we sort of put them all into the Hymenaster group. We're doing the same things with these black corals. We're calling them all Bathopathes. So you can see there on the right side at the edge of the branch, there is something hanging off it. Looks like a bivalve shell of some kind of shell, maybe a snail. And what's interesting, no, it's a bivalve. It's like a little clam. What's interesting is there's no polyps there. You can see the exposed black skeleton. So it looks like this clam has presumably settled on. I can actually see, it might be its foot that's sticking out. I can definitely see the large muscle through the shell. Well, that's really interesting. Can we get any more zoom on that? That's something new. At first I was thinking it was something that was eating that black coral, but I don't believe a bivalve clam is going to be eating coral.
Just took advantage of the exposed skeleton there to attach.
That would be my first guess. Now I know of one group of clams they do feed on small crustaceans. I'd be very surprised to see it. They typically burrow in the sediments. There's also something wispy behind that coral. I don't know if it's yet a third kind of black coral, or if it's something entirely different. It's up on the rock and white. It might be what? Hydroids, yep. Les Watling is suggesting maybe this is an early larval stage of a bivalve. How interesting. He's closed up right now. I saw he was open a moment ago. There you go.
There you go, yeah. That's a great view.
Huh.
He's really hanging on there. I mean, the coral is moving around in the currents. So.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. You know, there's a few crustaceans that have these sort of bivalve carapace, but I don't believe this is a crustacean. But that's what I'm trying to see. Are those legs of a crustacean, or is that a bivalve? Look at that. It kind of looks like a crustacean.
Legs to me, yeah. Huh.
So I don't think it's an ostracod.
There's definitely two of them there, yeah.
Huh. Concostracan. How interesting. Well, I mean, if it's some kind of little crustacean, then that changes what it might be doing. I mean, but how's it attached? You know, if it were an ostracod or a crustacean, it wouldn't be attached like that. I mean, if that's the foot of a bivalve, it's not like something I've ever seen, because it looks like it's kind of feathery at the end.
Yeah. We're not getting a lot of guesses from the shore here either, so definitely something different.
Finally written in that maybe it's a crustacean. All right, well, I think we're going to have some good images there. Before we get too far away, just on the rock behind this, there's a wispy white colony of some kind. Let's get a look at that. Oh, I think that's another one of the bryozoans. So we saw one of these. Was it on a really deep dive? I think it was, in the fracture zone.
Yeah.
And we saw a couple earlier. Yeah, there you go. You can get a really nice view of the feeding structures. They're called lophophores, and they're kind of horseshoe shaped, and they have cilia, and they basically generate a current and bring it in and feed on whatever small particles they can get. And I can also see at the very top there are two pedunculate barnacles, or gooseneck barnacles. They're the very white structures at the top that are settled on that bryozoan. There's another one down at about 7 o'clock. Thank you, pilot. Excellent. So Les Watling has now had a better look, and he says not an ostracod, but possibly a Nabalian. Nabalia. Remind me, I think that's a leptostracan, Les? It's going to make me search that. Yes, a leptostracan. I don't know. If it was a very young one. I didn't see much of its legs. Look to me less more like a concostracan, but I think they're only freshwater.
You can really see the ripples developed here whenever we have a little bit more sediment pooling in these low areas. Again, look to be fairly symmetric. Indication the currents might be moving back and forth as with the tidal currents. We've seen that on a few of our dives already, that the currents will actually change directions during the dive.
That might be a sea pen that we're, maybe it's a black coral, I wonder. They're right down at the base and it's in that rippled sediment, which is a little bit different. Yes. So there's definitely a black coral on the right side, and it's just, this looks like it's living where a sea pen would live. But it's not the same kind of sea pen that we saw earlier. If this is a sea pen, it looks like it has what are called polyp leaves. And yeah, so that is a sea pen, probably in the genus Penatula. So here you can see that peduncle is buried in the sediment. And there's one giant polyp, and that's the base of it is in the sediment. And then the main axis has a single stem, skeletal stem in there. And then it has these fleshy lobes. You can think of them as having lots of different arms. And then coming off the arms are the secondary polyps. Those are the feeding ones. So nice view. Thank you, pilot. Well, we're already cranking up our diversity for the day. Caitlin, our videographer, is pointing out to me also in other camera views, there's several things that are very light-colored and flimsy, and so really hard to see. So there's more on the bottom in terms of biology than we can see easily. Temperature is 2.1 degrees Celsius, so still pretty cold.
Yeah, plenty of oxygen, 3.2 milligrams per liter here. Yeah, let's try to look for something a little bit bigger if we can. I think it's going to be tough today with this magnesium crust to get a rock, but yeah. So the seamount we're diving on here, and the seamounts in this part of the Line Islands would have formed about 70 million years ago, plus or minus a few million. There are a few structures that date a little bit earlier than that. But many of these would have been much higher elevation originally, and through time, as that ocean plate that they're sitting on ages and cools and subsides, and so these things would have sunk down. And in some cases, we're building a reef up on those structures, like we are in Palmyra Atoll, where we'll be tomorrow. In other cases, maybe it never got shallow enough to build a reef, or it couldn't keep up, and we're getting these flat-topped, sometimes we're getting these flat-topped seamounts like what we're diving on today. But all of the surfaces that we're seeing here, these often look like sort of flow textures, but in fact, the finer scale features we're seeing are all this magnesium crust. And of course, you can imagine if you're sitting here exposed on this seamount wall for 70 million years, you've got lots of time to develop this thick crust, and that can make it very hard to sample the rocks, and sometimes very difficult to figure out what the rocks are underneath. It's been one of our challenges here working in these old terrains.
A couple of black corals and a crinoid on the surface of this rock. And I'm sorry, Del, I'm not sure if you just said something about sediments. Did you see the question from Astrid Leitner? Says there's a geochemist visiting in the ECC, Kristen Fogerin, and she's asking what the sediment composition is. So the next time we zoom in to look at something,
yeah, let's take a look and see what we can see in detail.
Might be a sponge. Is that a sponge or another culeolus? The lasers are almost on it right now. Could be another one of these stocked tunicates. Yes, so this is another one of these culeolus tunicates, stock tunicates, and you can see kind of that mesh-like structure on the inside. Those are filtering baskets, and so it generates this current, and that filter basket has a lot of mucus on it, and so the mucus will bind up organic particles, and then they will be basically rolled up and brought to the mouth, which is down on the lower side. Thank you, pilot. Looks like there's also a brittle star wrapped around the stalk at the base, and I noted that on the previous one that we saw had this brittle star in the same position.
Looks like mucus is pretty good catching sand grains as well. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is actually what we saw on that first dive. I think on the Anu unit dive, looked just like this, and it even had worms or amphipods or something growing on the side, and this one does too. So that's kind of interesting observation. We're good when the video's good.
Yeah, when we get a good, we're over some sediment, if you could zoom in and take a good look, if you get a chance, pilot, that would be great. Okay, perfect. All right, fans of deep sea sediment, stay tuned here.
That could be most of the animals out here since they're feeding in it.
That's right. We just should ask them what it is. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so there is a rat tail in Sirius camera 2. Pretty high up, we're not going to be able to get it with D2.
So yeah, looking at the sediments here, very uniform grain size. You know, we usually call well sorted and more of a fluvial environment, but all the same size grains. We sampled some of these a few dives ago, these lighter colored, and it looked like they were mostly forams. Foraminifera, but if someone on shore wants to chime in or offer an opinion here, please do.
I think science is ready.
Yep. Thanks, pilot. Yeah, so I'd imagine most of the sediment, sediment must have been pelagic falling down, or maybe perhaps some benthic forams, but we're not seeing, it doesn't look like we're seeing carbonate material being eroded from the upper margins. And we get onto some of the shallower atolls here on the next few dives, we're actually going to have a source of sediment above us, and we'll see that some of that being eroded. And actually, if you look at the bathymetry, we'll be able to see some of that being washed out into deeper canyons.
If Chris has returned to the ECC, you can tell us about this. And I'm wondering, Chris, could this be a bit of a scoop? I'm not sure. My memory is saying something like Semperella or something along those lines. I would have to wait for Chris to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm here, Scott. Yeah, and wow, I'm not really positive about this. I think it's a ferronematid, which is one type of glass sponge. It's definitely a glass sponge, so let's go there. And possibly in the family Ferronematidae, so we can go there. I don't think it's Semperella because the depression in the side that you're looking at right now, in Semperella, that's usually subdivided, and this looks like just a single depression with some holes, which are very unusual. So it would not surprise me at all if this isn't even a Ferronematid. I don't know the sponge.
Great, thanks, Chris. My sense is that this is pretty small, and so I'm wondering if it's just an early growth stage of some of the bigger ones that we see. Thank you, pilot. So while we're moving on here again, Les Watling and I have converged on an identification of that little bivalve-like structure that we saw on the coral, and we believe it's an Ascothoracidin, which used to be classified with the barnacles, a weird kind of barnacle, but now it's kind of put out in its own group, and that's a really exciting observation. I've never seen one of those alive, and my recollection is that they do associate with corals. I'm going to do a little bit more research on that. Sorry, pilot, do you have time to look to the lower right? You just passed something else on the stock. I apologize. Yeah, I'm not. It very well could be. It just looked a little bit lighter in color. Yeah, it's probably going to be that same tunicate. There's a lot of squat objects on the rock here too, and I don't know if those are the bases of sponges or something else. Yep. Oh yeah, yeah, we'll have a look at that too.
Mr. Collins, please call 217 or come on down.
All right, so this is that same Culeolus-like tunicate, so we're fine with that. So let's check out these other little, squat objects. Agreed. It's suggesting sponge to me.
Huh.
It's kind of interesting. 3 of them here together. I haven't noticed anything like this earlier. So the possibilities are that it is a sponge, that it is a completely retracted anemone, or that it is maybe another morphology of one of these excuse me, now I've got that in my mind. These Culeolus-like tunicates, except that I don't see any openings on it. Yeah, there's several of them. I seem to recall, you remember, I think it was the new unit, when we saw this stock tunicate, we were seeing these little cases on the rock next to it. They weren't this big, and those were also tunicates, and we thought of a different kind. But now, now we're seeing these little globular structures around it. But again, if it was a tunicate, there would need to be some opening, and so maybe what I'm seeing there, yeah, okay, so you see on top a little volcano-like opening.
Yeah.
That's probably the in-current siphon of a tunicate, and then just down below it, kind of at 1 or 2 o'clock from it, you see there's a little swelling. I'll bet that's the X-current. So I think that's a sea squirt. That's a different kind of tunicate. It's just not on a stalk. And sea squirts are really well known for incorporating all kinds of crazy stuffs into their tunic. The tunic is that outer covering of the body. Great. Thank you, pilot. In the sediments ahead to the right, there's going to be something that we're wondering is a piece of wood. Kristen noted. Tina Molodtsova from the Shirshov Institute in Russia has joined us, and she's also very excited about that Ascothoracidin we saw. She said that she thought they were always parasitic, with only the Nauplii free living, and I agree. So you have to look to the right, pilot, in the sediments. Yeah, farther right. There's an elongated structure that may be a somewhat buried piece of wood, or, yeah, there we go.
Huh.
And that would be interesting. There's a whole group of scientists who are working on woodfall communities, and there's a whole different group of organisms that have evolved to associate with sunken wood, and you don't find them in other places.
Yeah, I've heard of whale falls, but I never thought much about wood falls out here.
Well, and exactly, and it's a really good comparison because they're very restricted environments, and it's a certain kind of nutrient that you might be able to extract from it. So there are organisms that have specialized to feed in there. So let's see if this is just a weird shaped rock or if it is indeed a piece of wood.
Some kind of tube. Yeah.
Yeah, it's looking more rocky to me now than woody.
Huh.
Pretty interesting shape, huh? Can see one arm of a brittle star kind of peeking out there. I'm not really making out any other fauna. You would expect that if this was a woodfall, it would be kind of riddled with tubes of various boring kinds of bivalves and worms and other animals. If you're asking science, yes. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting.
Oh yeah. Why, is that a coral tucked way in there? How about that?
It's hiding from the currents or something. I don't know.
These stock tunicates are really quite common here. Yeah, it's hiding from the currents. Yep, so there he's attached to the rock on the left face, and there's a polychaete worm behind it, a scale worm. We imaged one of those also on the deep dive. So this is the second Chrysogorgia of the day. I didn't describe the first one. Chris was describing the sea star. So this is a member of the family Chrysogorgiidae, the golden corals, so called because the skeleton has this kind of golden iridescent sheen. And you can see that very nicely right through the tissue. The tissue is also almost transparent, or is largely transparent. Polyps have this really pretty pink color, and you can see that the size of the polyps relative to the skeleton and the tissue on the skeleton is quite huge. And as we almost always see, there's a squat lobster in the branches. Oh, yeah, if you could find that for me, I didn't notice it. Oh, no, yeah, it's in a rock pen. Yeah, great. And there's for National Shrimp Day, there's a thread-legged shrimp on the rock behind it. That's in the family Nematocarcinidae. And yeah, our second rock pen.
Yeah, I think this is the same one we saw earlier, the first one we came across.
I would agree. It's just a much smaller one.
Right.
And you can see that point at the upper part. You can really nicely see that internal axial rod. Thank you, pilot. Yeah, I got you. Can we get a look on the rock, just going to the lower right corner? There's a brittle star, kind of pinkish, on the face of the rock. Verify if that's a brittle star or if that's a bracingid of some kind with 5 arms. So we see a lot of these larger brittle stars in the arms of corals. And Tim Shank, we discussed this before, is interested in the relationship of the brittle star to the coral. So it's instructive for us to also look at the larger ones that are on the rock face and see, are these the same or different species than what we're seeing on the coral. It's next to something I can see waving back and forth. So it is indeed a brittle star. You can see it's got those very long spines on the arms. And you can see the arms look like they're a series of vertebrae. They're called ossicles, and they have muscle and connective tissue between them. And so that's why they can bend their arms so well. There's so many of them. The mouth is down. This may be capturing food out of the water column, those spines. This, I think, may be the family Okeanos. We saw the other day on a dive an amazing observation of a brittle star kind of reaching up into the water and capturing a squid. It was a different family than this, but it also had these long spines. So now I start to wonder if the spines may be used to capture stuff from the water column. Thank you, pilot. And another one of these stock tunicates to the left.
Yeah.
Go ahead, survey.
Alright, so we are going to come off a little early today.
Okay.
It's likely going to be in the next hour. So I'm going to ask now for when is approximately but we will just letting you know that that's going to happen.
Understood. Thank you. Copy that, Nav. Thank you. Pilot, can we get a look at the squiggly white line on the rock on the right, please? So I've just communicated that information to our scientists on shore in the chat room. Just to refresh, basically we have winds of about 20 knots here on the surface, coming from a consistent direction, which means the waves and the swells are building, and it becomes quite dangerous to try to recover the ROV when we have really big swells. And so out of an abundance of precaution, we may be coming to the surface in the next half hour or so. We may leave bottom. Okay, a series of tubes of some kind, not sure, could be polychaete, could be an amphipod that's building them, but there's nothing really definable there. Thank you, pilot. Right, a lot of movement. Copy that, Nav, thank you. Looks like, is this two sea stars, or is this a sea star on something else like a coral? It looks like it could be one of these corallivorous sea stars, but there's definitely something underneath it, and it seems to be in a feeding posture, kind of raised a little bit on the legs, and perhaps a swollen disc, or that might just be the effect of it bowed upwards. That colony to the right side, that's another black coral.
Huh.
Oh, it's on a crinoid?
Wow.
Wow, it's a sea star and a crinoid. Well, Chris Ma is going to be calling in seconds. I can guarantee it. Yeah, well, I think it's the sea star is feeding on the crinoid. That's what I think. Yeah, maybe. I hadn't realized that. I see a little tiny bryozoan there down in the bottom right. Huh. Very interesting. Got to find your dinner where you can get it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good question. You would think that the stock crinoid would be definitely easier pickings than the Comatula, the feather stars, but I can't tell myself from the arms that we see which of those it would be. Oh, there's also a polychaete worm tucked under there. It's kind of purple in color. Cirri is the word you're looking for. Yeah. So the thing is, some of those stock crinoids also have cirri. Oh, there might be Chris.
Hey, it's Chris Ma.
There we go. What do you think, Chris? I haven't seen this before.
I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying. So this is the solasterid called Lofaster. Most people think of sunstars as having multiple arms, but there's actually a couple of them that are just 5-rayed, and this is one of them. This is really kind of an interesting and an unprecedented observation, because I don't know that I've ever seen one feeding on anything like this before. So this is really kind of cool. I don't know necessarily how common this is, but I mean, there's not a lot to eat on crinoids, frankly. So I kind of wonder if these are just opportunistic moments. But it kind of makes sense that there's a lot of these, and if you're desperate, you're going to go for anything that's there. But basically what's happening here is the stomach on the underside is everted, and it's climbed over the surface. It's probably going for the cup where all of the guts and things are, and the stomach's probably if we were to sort of lift it up, what we would see is the stomach is probably extended out onto the animal itself and is probably devouring all of the good parts, the soft meat and whatnot. Some of the other animals that I've seen just consume the entire animal, and then you can find the crinoid ossicles in their gut. There are other sea stars that have recorded ossicles in their gut, but we've always thought that they might easily be explained as just having sediment in their gut as well. So, these might be things that are just ambient debris. So that's actual, like, starfish to crinoid contact, which is really, exciting as far as I'm concerned. This is, as far as I'm concerned, I am sorry for the storm that is creating all of the disruption, but if this is the only thing you saw today, that would just make my entire day. That was great.
It's good to hear.
Well, yeah, that is good.
Short of actually watching a celastrid feeding on another sea star, which is also really exciting. I'm really stoked that we saw this, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. You just never know what's going to get us scientists excited. For Chris, it was that observation of the sea star feeding on the crinoid, which I thought was fascinating. I never saw it before. But for me, it was that tiny little bivalved ascothorascan on the black coral earlier, as I'd never seen one of those alive. So yeah, this is indeed another Chrysogorgia. You can see that beautiful golden skeleton, and we see the chirostylid squat lobster in its branches. Thank you, Pilot. And thank you, Chris. And Pilot, as we're going over the black coral above on the rock, let's take a look. Every once in a while, have a look to see again if there's a polychaete there, when conditions warrant, not to slow us down, but if you have the opportunity. Thank you. I agree. I do not see a polychaete in there. Great. So, Del, I apologize if you said this before, or what do you make of these large sort of boulder-like features?
Yeah, so we are on the steeper part of the slope here, so it's likely these at some point had rolled down. But you can see they now look like they're almost molded in there, and that's the crust really covering them up. It really covers up a lot of the primary textures we might see on the rock. But yeah, these are almost certainly loose at one point, and now have become crusted in.
So, sorry, there's all kinds of interesting things in here, Del.
More interesting
I wonder
than
if they're
crusted
being
rocks.
kind of protected a little bit in this area. So this is another kind of cnidarian. We've seen at least a couple of them so far in the expedition. It's a hydroid, so it belongs to the class Hydrozoa, and we've seen many of these really tiny jellyfish we call Hydromedusa. They're directly related to this, or if you're doing your high school biology, the Freshwater Hydra. This is a giant solitary polyp. So you see it's got two sets of tentacles there, one large ring on the outside, and the smaller one on the inside is right around the mouth. And that cluster of grape-like structures that you see in there, those are gonads, the eggs, or basically where the eggs and the sperm would be made. Really nice column to the body. The stomach is inside that entire tube. And yeah, if we can go all the way down to the bottom, I wonder if that's a carnivorous sponge next to it. That's what I think. That little stalk with the 4 little balls, I believe that's a carnivorous sponge. Very tiny.
Hi, Scott. This is Chris. So these are the weird sponges we saw on Wake, around Wake, where they're demosponges. I don't know if Shirley's on right now, but I'm trying to remember what our nickname for these things, but they just create these balls on a stem. And it's most definitely a demo sponge, and I don't think anyone's gone any further than that.
Thank you, Chris. How about string of pearls sponge? On the right side of the rock, there was a white structure right there. Yeah, exactly. Huh. This looks like a rather sickly Iridogorgia, I think. Trying to grow, but in kind of bad shape. So an Iridogorgia is another kind of Chrysogorgia, and we've seen these really tall, spiraling, beautifully elegant colonies. This seems to have that kind of a structure. Or it's a Pleurogorgia, I suppose, is another possibility. It's a different genus in the same family. Maybe it's a Pleurogorgia. Also a Chrysogorgia, but it has more branches. But you can see this one, a lot of the polyps are gone. We can see a hydroid there in the lower, between the branches. You can see its tentacles extended, a lot like what we just saw that was solitary. This one is a little bit of a colonial one, perhaps. And there's other worms and stuff that are growing on the exposed branches. Thank you, pilot. Small crinoid there. Kebab sponge is what Bruce Mundy is saying. That's a good descriptor. There's another Bathypathes black coral growing off the right side of that rock. I saw some more shrimp in there. There's an Anthomastus, and that might be a line of barnacles going down the side of that rock on the right side. Yeah, I'm not sure why they're growing in such a perfect line. My guess is there is a slightly elevated ridge there that the larvae are settling on right on the edge where the currents would be strongest. So that's a kind of a interesting observation. I mean, they've got lots of rock surface to settle on, but they seem to be choosing that edge. Cool. So that would suggest to me that those rocks allow both a good amount of current, but also not too much current, so all the larvae can settle there and not be blown off. We've seen some pretty heavy current here. So we have two things. We have a long whip tube on the left side of a rock, and we have a Parantipathes black coral just almost in the center bottom. Yeah, I would like to do both if you have the opportunity. I see you're a little bit behind, so I don't know if we can. This one in the foreground, the feather, I think we already know what it is. It's going to be a Parantipathes black coral, so quick zoom of that, but I don't know what that other tube-like thing is. Yep, so this is now, what, our third or fourth different black coral species today. And you can see that it's got one slender central axis and then lots of little tiny side branches. And Tina Molitsova, who's in the chat room, is an expert on the black corals, and so she can confirm that identity or perhaps tell if it's a different genus, tell me what that is. Looks like maybe another rock pen we're passing over, but what is this tube-like thing? It's the color that's throwing me off. The structure is kind of bamboo coral-like, but the color is all wrong. Wow, that's a black coral. So I guess it's a Stichopathes black coral. Well, that's interesting, and it's growing very horizontal instead of upright.
It's not on the sand. You can see the shadow. It's up off the bottom there.
Tucked under that rock. So now we're up to, I think, 5 species of black coral. So black coral's definitely winning today. Was there tissue stripped in the middle here? Just to the bottom part of just off the screen. I think there might be some tissue stripped off the skeleton if we can get a look at that. Yeah, so there's, that might be an octopus egg.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, that's an egg mass of some kind, I believe, that gray structure that we're seeing. So I'm going to stick with it's an egg. When I've seen things of that shape, the ones that we've been able to identify are Dumbo octopus. So maybe that's what that is. Very interesting. Tina is confirming for me that last one was a Parantipathes, and here we have a Stichopathes. So this is a black coral-dominated seamount so far. Oh, and a couple of more of the sponges that we were looking at earlier that Chris was talking about, and then several of those tunicates, squat tunicates. And I think that was another bubblegum coral. We saw one earlier that was being overgrown with a zoanthid. That one did not appear to have any yellow on it. Tina confirms that that's the genus Sticopathes for the black coral. There's another, so this one looks more clear to me. The face of the rock to the right side of the lasers has a white colony. That's a Pleurogorgia, a good view of the morphology there. So I think we got that right on the one we looked at closely.
Yeah, give us a zoom here if you could. Oh.
Yeah, looks like a little squat lobster. So this is the kind of squat lobster that you would typically see sitting on the rock and not on a coral. It's related to the ones that are on corals, but I'm a little bit surprised to see that perched up there. I'm guessing it's just because it's trying to get a higher location to sit and not because it has anything to do with this Parentipathes. And let's just get a quick look at this yellow one, just to verify that this is indeed Stauropathes and not Aleopathes. I'm sorry, I'm just transmitting some information to shore, so I'm not looking at anything. Okay. So what I'm looking for is the style of the branching and whether there's a regular bifurcating pattern, and that is what I'm seeing. So I would say that this is a Stauropathes. Thank you. And Tina agrees that that is a Stauropathes. I saw another sea pen in the sediments there, and it was a different kind of sea pen that we'd seen earlier, so I'm going to keep my eye out. See if we see that again. Can we get a quick zoom to the left of the lasers? There's a whitish gray colony coming off the rock. Oh, okay, sorry, it's a Pleurogorgia. And then there's maybe a cup coral or anemone down below. So I'm sorry, pilot, we've seen this before. If you want to image that sea star, that would be fine. If you want to image the sea star, that would be fine. That you were going in on initially, I pulled you away. This may be different than the one we were looking at earlier. It's certainly got more legs, but I suspect it's in the same family. So we'll just get a quick zoom image, and then we can go on our way. Right. No, so the difference, what you're seeing here, this is actually soft tissue that's being extended from the upper surface of the sea star. What you were seeing on the last one were hard parts. They're little spine-like structures that had a flat top that was bumpy, and that's the difference. Thank you. That's good for this. Couple of Bathypathes black corals on top of that rock, and the yellow crinoid in the top right. Looks like Bathypathes to me is the dominant today. I can see another rock pen down there and another one of the stock tunicates. Kind of an interesting hodgepodge of animals, and whether they're kind of up on the top exposed or whether they're kind of tucked away on the sides of these rocks.
Yeah, it's a good contrast to yesterday's dive, though. We saw, I think, a lot less diversity, a lot smaller animals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Twice as deep.
Twice as deep, yep.
I think I see a large bubblegum coral on the upper right. That's now, I think, the fourth one that we've seen today. The first one we saw was really covered in zoanthids. The last two,
Hey, Scott.
haven't seen that. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. Were you in the middle of talking about something else? I'm sorry.
No, I'm just pointing out some stuff as we go by, but you can describe that sea star if you'd like.
Certainly. So that is Asthenactis in the family Mixasteridae. Prior to the Okeanos dives, Mixasterids were considered the most rarely encountered sea stars on Earth. We had maybe, 3 or 4 of them in collections worldwide, and each one was a separate species. And we've since been sort of learning that while they're not common, they are not as rare as we thought. They just seem to occur by themselves and widely spaced across great distances. We've been seeing, so this is a multi-armed sea star that has a really flobby kind of body. The spines are covered with skin-covered sacs. They're really strange animals, and there are animals similar to them in the Jurassic. And the molecular data suggests that these animals might be very early in the phylogeny of sea stars. So they're doubly interesting for that reason. As far as the species go, we used to think this was the one that occurred in Hawaii, but there's different morphologies we've been seeing. This one, I think, was showing six rays. There's another one that we're seeing with sort of 8 to 10 rays, and the differing numbers of rays seems to be consistent. So either it's some kind of phenotypic difference or they're genuinely different species. So there's lots of different questions going on, and there are so few of them that it's really hard to tell sort of what's going on simply based on the imagery and the few specimens that we've collected so far. But that's part of the fun, and obviously, there's always more to learn about these things. I see you have a sponge, so I'll shut up and let you go. Thank you,
Chris. And I don't know if that means we transition to the next Chris, but we are looking at a sponge here. Just jump in, Chris.
Yeah, so that was good, Chris, and now bad Chris will talk. This actually used to be a nickname in Earl, but anyway, this is a glass sponge that's dead, and it's overgrown with hydroids and forams and probably a number of other things. But this sponge used to be an Aspidoscopulia, if you want to try to pronounce that 3 times fast. It's in the family Farreidae. It's a glass sponge, and it's really beautiful. I think it was described by Dr. Konstantin Tabachnik at the Shirshov Institute in Moscow, if I'm not mistaken, who's very interested in this group. So that's my best guess, and let's see if you can say it again fast. Aspidoscopulia.
Aspidoscopulia.
I'm not even going to try.
You got it.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
And so one thing that's interesting about this is Chris noted that it's dead, and we can tell that because of the brown color. And basically what that means is the organics that are falling out of the water column aren't being sloughed off or cleared off the tissue, and so they're sticking to it. And so instead of appearing white, it appears brown. But it's still providing habitat for a variety of organisms. So you saw that there was an anemone on there and several barnacles and so on. So even after the death, they continue to grow. So I think this very large fan that's going to be to the left of the lasers, yeah, there's 2 of them. Let's check those out. I'm not sure if these are bubblegum corals again or something different. And then there's also something different behind it. Maybe our first bamboo coral, those whip-like ones. So these have, from a distance, they kind of look like the shape of bubblegums, but different from what we'd seen before, but they look overgrown. Yeah. So again, we're seeing a white morph, either bubblegum coral or coralliid. I'm going to go with bubblegum coral. That's a paragorgiid, but again, this one is almost entirely overgrown by what I refer to as this parasitic zoanthid, kind of a colonial anemone. So you only see the tips of the underlying coral showing up there in white. The brittle star that you see its coiled arms there, would normally associate with this bubblegum coral. not with the zoanthids, but apparently our observations suggest it doesn't go away.
Yeah,
when
no,
it gets
looks like the
overgrown.
zoanthid is underneath the star there. It's wrapped around it at least. Yeah.
Right.
Huh.
And, we rarely see this association, if you will, where it's so completely overgrown that there's no paragorgia left. So I guess that might be a good strategy by the parasite so that it doesn't, topple over once it's dead. Thank you, pilot. If we could look just behind there, that wispy branching thing. I thought it was a bamboo coral. It's yet another kind of black coral. But there's a bamboo over on that side. Okay. And Tina is going to have to remind me about this genus. It's yet another new one. Trissopathes or heteropathes, something like that. It's, again, black coral. You can kind of see the black skeleton through the tissue. And why it looks so beige in the center there is you've got a real tight cluster of polyps in the center, whereas they're more not so densely distributed along little side branches. Thank you. And then further to the right, there's another whip. So some good diversity. I see a kind of third urchin in the back there, that purple urchin, maybe one of the tam o'shanter urchins. Yeah, definitely a bamboo coral. You can see kind of the pinkish tips to the polyp. You see the white skeleton through the transparent tissue, and every once in a while you see a black band in that skeleton. That's what tells us it's a bamboo. And I think I see only 1-2 bands really far apart, and that's really informative to us. So this is something that we call long bones, and we call it long bones because that white internode is so long and uninterrupted. So that's great information right there. Thank you, pilot. Yep, same thing. It's really overgrown with these zoanthids, so it's more of a zoanthid colony than it is an octocoral, but it is an octocoral. Well, we're getting a lot of information here, so even though we're struggling with the conditions on the surface, we've already learned a lot about what's here on the seamount just west of Palmyra. We're at a depth of 2,120 meters, and this would be the first ever dive to these depths within this part of the National Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. So we've learned a lot already about its diversity. Yeah, the purple one. Yeah, I'd seen it when we were stopped to look for the corals, and I noted it. Thanks. Not sure what's just to the right of the lasers. It's a stock that's seen better days. Please. I think that's a Metallogorgia, now dead. So this is going to be really interesting. Yeah, you see the reflection of the iridescence of the skeleton? This is definitely a Metallogorgia, but it's dead. There are no live tissue. What's missing, Del?
The squat lobster.
The
brittle star.
The brittle star, exactly. So the brittle star is only there when the coral is alive. And when the coral is alive, it's always there. Fascinating. This is even though this is dead, this is a really great observation. And is that a sponge or is that another egg?
It's like an egg, yeah.
Yeah. Octopus have been busy around here. I think that's what we got. And there's a little, the white thing above it is a barnacle, but that sort of beige-like ball that you see, that's an octopus has laid an egg and it's covered it in a sac. And I don't know what the time period is that it takes for that thing to develop and hatch, but we know that in some deep water octopus it can be as long as 4 years. So who knows? Months to years.
Yeah, I wanted to wait when we saw the first one. You advised against it. So
we might have some other dives to do. Cool. That was a great observation. Still seeing these mound-like tunicates as well.
What is the evolutionary advantage of having an egg that sets for so long? It seems like the longer it sets, the more likely something would happen to it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons they're stuck on corals. What's on the top of these rocks to the lower left? I guess they're just, it's two more of those brittle stars. That's okay, pilot. Keep going. We had an image of those earlier. Right, so what is the evolutionary advantage of taking so long? So I'm not sure. You know, there's a developmental process, right? So it has to develop, and many animals that develop really quickly actually feed as a larval stage.
Oh, yeah.
And that's can be a good strategy for a number of reasons. One, it means that the adult doesn't have to provide so much yolk to develop. It's kind of like, you know, get out, get your own food, develop on your own. But then you're at the mercy of a lot of fish and these filter feeders.
Right, and then you produce thousands or millions of larvae, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So.
Whereas something that is going to take a very long time to develop is probably going to hatch more or less fully developed, and so can right away start defending itself and hunting. So that's one possibility. It's a great question. Now I know what I'll be studying tonight.
We're doing a long form video on octopus eggs, yes. Oh, they're ready.
And lots of these little squat, brownish mounding objects, and these are tunicates. Sea squirts, deep sea squirts. What about the white balls? Is that a sponge? I think it is. The laser just passing over it now. Please. Yeah, this is, I think, a bit of a different sponge for the day. You can see it's a glass sponge, and I'm going to let Chris Kelly inform us on this. Stalked glass sponge. I think it's developing.
So, Scott, this is another glass sponge. I think it's the first one we've seen today, and this is in the family Euplectellidae. It's one of the stalked members of that family, and I believe it's in the genus Bolosoma. And I think perhaps that name comes from the fact that it has usually a very round head, but on the other side of it, there's a scoop out, which you can't see, which is very distinctive. So the water kind of comes in this side of the sponge, I suspect, and then goes out through that hole on the top as well as the other side. But a really beautiful, healthy colony of Bolosoma.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm noting with the lasers there, this is a pretty small colony of this Bolosoma, and we've seen them, you know, huge, like a meter tall. And so this is probably a relatively young one in the grand scheme of things. I don't know how fast they grow and how much they age, so it's hard to say. Chris, do you know what the translation of Bolosoma is? I heard you say that the name may be based on the rounded top part of that sponge.
Well, my guess is that I think soma is Latin for body, if I'm not mistaken, and then bolo, I think, is round, so sort of a round body, and then they must have been referring to the top part of it that's sticking on the stalk.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting sometimes to learn the etymology of these various names, and a lot of the Latin names that we use do have some descriptive function, tell you something about what you're looking at. But may also be based on other kinds of observations, like where it came from, the first one that was ever sampled, and so on. Sea cucumber, I think, just above the lasers. Might as well get a quick zoom on this. This, I think, might be a morph that we saw earlier in the dive. Yep, we saw that one earlier. Synallactidae was the family. Thank you. We are certainly not seeing many fish. Here's another one of the yellow Stauropathes black coral fans. And I never got an ID from Tina on the black coral that was branched. The one that, let's see. Yeah, it was between those two bubblegum corals.
Yeah, what do you think, Astrid? Just not enough sediment here for the fish, or?
Well, I think Astrid had to step away. She had maybe to go to a class or a seminar. That's one idea, is that we see more fish in areas with deeper sediment that would have more of the infaunal polychaetes or amphipods that a lot of the fish would feed on. It's hard to say why we're not seeing as many here, because on a deeper dive yesterday we saw quite a few, a surprising number, and I would have thought with productivity in this area that there would have been more fish. I don't know. It might even be that the surge of the Sirius, because of the roll of the ship and all, with the winds up above, it might be that that's setting off some sort of a vibration or pressure wave signal that's scaring away the mobile organisms like the fish. We'll probably never know the answer, but there are several different thoughts. The habitat, the avoidance of the fish, and maybe some other things that I can't think of right now.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting idea, that the motion of the vessel, different sea states, could make some different sounds or vibrations.
Large nematocarcinid shrimp on the right. That's the thread-legged shrimp. They have these very, very long, slender legs. And I see another one of the small Bolosoma sponges growing off the rock on the right. We just imaged that one up close. And then a Chrysogorgia colony. It's that kind of pinkish one that was on the rock. So again, a good diversity of animals down here and a good abundance. We just, if we could back up just a little bit, Pilot, in the sediments just off the center of the screen, it's probably going to be right of center now. I think there may have been another sea pen in the sediments, and I'm not sure if it was different. There we go. Okay, it's the Pennatula again. That's fine, we saw that earlier. Thank you. Temperature of the water here is a balmy 2.2 degrees Celsius. That's only about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Rough calculation.
It's pretty good. I can vouch he did it in his head, folks. He doesn't have his app out or anything. So.
Double it and add 30.
So it's interesting that the Sirius, the upper stage, is actually moving around so much, because it's a long way down there. How much cable do you have between the Sirius and the ship? 2 miles or so, and yet the thing is still bobbing up and down?
I would have to look at the, so I'm looking at the HIPAC, which is basically the bathymetry, and the vehicles are more or less right under the ship. And so there isn't that much wire streamed out. We're at 2,100 meters depth, so that's 2 kilometers. That's about 1.2 miles. So I don't think there's more than 1.5 miles of cable stretched out, although that's a lot of cable.
It's still a lot of cable, yeah.
But it's a really good observation, Bruce. And for those of you on shore, if you look at camera 2, you'll get the view that Bruce is referring to. And that is a really good indication of what's happening at the surface here on the ship. We're moving up and down a lot because of the swells that are moving by and the wind kind of buffeting us, and it's one of the reasons why we may have to recover this vehicle in just a few minutes, because this is an extremely heavy vehicle, and trying to get it out of the water and onto the deck of the ship is pretty dangerous in these kinds of conditions. It's swinging around, and we've got people on deck who are responsible for trying to get this on the deck safely, and we have to be aware of their safety as well. Thanks for making the observation, Bruce.
It also gives you an appreciation for why we have this 2-bodied system here. You can imagine if the ROV that we have in the bottom was moving like this, how difficult it would be to zoom in.
Yeah. I don't think everybody would be enjoying it quite so much.
No. Yeah, even on shore, you may not want to look at camera too long today. Good.
Yeah, and just for the people on shore, when they recover this vehicle, the lower one, D2, it's going to be like trying to catch a minivan that's moving on a swing when it comes up to the ship.
That's a pretty good analogy. Pretty good analogy. Let's have a look just to the left, lower left of the lasers. There's a small, I think it might be a cup coral, and we haven't seen a cup coral today. Yep, I think you're right. I think it looks like the side column is pink in color, so that is not a cup coral, that is a sea anemone. You can see it's very warty and rough, the body. And it looks like maybe, yeah, there's a brittle star right there in the foreground. You can see it's really swollen, that central disc, so that thing's enjoyed a good meal. Thank you, pilot. It's always so interesting to do these deep sea dives and see the different patterns of the distribution and abundance of the animals on the bottom. So we have a black coral bathypathes coming into view here, and we've seen, you know, a couple of dozen of them at least today. But they don't tend to be concentrated in one area. They're not really abundant in any one area. However, we have come into patches where maybe there's a ideal bit of sheltering. The currents are just right, where we've seen several colonies of different species together. So in the sediment, I think there might be another sea pen. There's on the far right another one of the bathypathes, and then there's a bunch of them coming up. So I'm just saying we're not seeing good numbers, but here we are coming into a place where there are some good numbers. Let's get a quick view of the sea pen, I'm sorry, pilot, on the lower left. No problem. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, so we passed over one of these quickly earlier, but this is different. We haven't got a good image of it, so this is going to help now. So I think this is probably our third, at least our third species, maybe our fourth species of sea pen for the day. And I will reserve judgment on a name, something like Helipterus. I don't think it's Helipterus, but just call it a stock sea pen for now. Thank you. I am happy with that. And now we can have a look at some of these really big fans that are just ahead of us. The one on the right in particular, I'm not sure if it's going to be just a black coral that's looming out there, or if that's something different. It's a good size. Yeah, I think it's just a much taller black coral, bathypathes-like. You can see several of them around here. So, you know, you say something and then nature goes and proves you wrong. What do you mean no abundance in one place? See lots of these low mounding tunicates on the rock on the left side, the kind of brown in color. Yes, please. The branches are much thinner than these other ones, so I suspect this is going to be a different species. The polyps even look smaller. Still, I believe it's a bathypathes. I suppose there's a possibility that it could be a schizopathes, but yeah, it looks like, is that a, I don't know if that's a worm or a brittle star with its arms really tightly wound. It's something, huh?
There's a couple of them there, yeah.
Is that right?
Another one down a few branches, and then one on the left, too. A couple on the left,
yeah. Huh. Yeah, no, that's not a brittle star. Yeah, I think it is a worm that's tightly coiled on that branch. I don't think this is what they call bathypathes alternata, because the branches aren't alternating in position as they go up. Tina says this is a, quotes, real bathypathes. So unlike these other ones we're seeing that have the you notice all of the pinnules, the side branches, come out to exactly the same position.
Yeah, it looked like a little rectangle. Yeah.
What do they call that in Word?
Not
It's like not left justified or right justified, but
right.
where you have the perfect margins. Okay, that's good on that one. Thank you. But you can see it's kind of different from this one that's on the left and the one that's behind it. It has thicker branches, bigger polyps, and all the pinnules are an even size. Whereas this one, as you go to the top, the branch lengths are tapering, so they're a little bit shorter. So it appears to come to a point. We have another of the bubblegum corals. That's, again, looks to me like it's almost completely overgrown with zoanthids. So all you're seeing is the white tips instead of a whole white fin. And here's another one of the black coral trissopathes, that one that's got just a couple of branches. I think we're good here. Thank you. We've had close looks at all of these things earlier in the dive. Again, you can see a good patch here of density of these sea squirts. Oh, there's a fish on the left side of the screen, just finally. All right, Bruce, if you're still there.
Yep, I'm still here. Can't quite tell yet. It's swimming like an eel, and at this depth, I would suspect it's a cutthroat eel in the family Synaphobranchidae.
I think you're going to change your mind there, Bruce.
No, I'm totally wrong.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, totally wrong. This is a rat tail. It's a macrurid, family Macruridae, a rat tail or grenadier. This looks like a fairly large one. It's in the genus Coryphaenoides. These are large predators and scavengers. They're often attracted to the carcasses of animals that fall from shallow water. They're attracted to baited camera systems, baits. Large scales, robust, dark color, kind of a pointed snout with a large eye. You can see the extended fin rays on the pelvic fins, the fins on the belly that have a sensory function. This could be a species called Coryphaenoides armatus. I wish that Astrid was still on because she knows these better than I do. There's another species that lives deeper that I think we saw a couple of days ago called Coryphaenoides giaquinae. That one is a little bit lighter in color and has a more pointed snout. So a rat tail in the genus Coryphaenoides.
Thank you, Bruce. And that rat tail led us to this other coral that you're seeing, this yellow one. This is yet another black coral. And now you can see another color morph of the black corals. So the black skeleton is completely hidden in this yellow tissue. And this is we're going to have to say that this is in the genus Stichopathes. However, I believe the molecular data are showing us that not all unbranched black corals belong to Stichopathes, or there's another shallower water genus, the Cirripathes. But I suspect if we follow this long enough, eventually we're going to see this little hold fast against the rock. But you can see it's a pretty long one.
There you go.
Yep. Finally attaches to the surface somewhere down there. So nice observation. Another new species for the day. Go ahead, Nev. Understood. Copy that, pilot. Understood. And I think we've prepped shoreside science for the disappointment. Pilot, let's get a look just to the right of the lasers. That thing that's coming out of the depression looks kind of brownish. Oh, I see. It's two more of these black coral colonies. I thought it was one stranger branching one. Well, folks, so if you heard our navigator, our ROV navigator, we are calling the dive now. The winds have picked up to greater than 20 knots, and this is the most prudent and safe thing to do. So even though we had a short dive, I think we saw some really remarkable diversity.
Yeah, I think we got a good sense for what's here, which is one of our main goals.
it's definitely impressive, the number of different genera of black corals. I was quite surprised by that number. But we saw various corals and the sea cucumbers, urchins. Pretty sparse on the fish. Sorry, fish folks. We got very excited, or certainly Les Watling and I got very excited by seeing that Ascothorascan crustacean on the black coral. Never seen one of those alive before, so that was cool. I thought it was fascinating, and then Chris Ma called in equally excited about the observation of a sea star feeding on a crinoid. Said he'd never actually seen that species feeding before, let alone feeding on a crinoid, which really surprised him. So some good observations in our limited time here on bottom, and thank you for joining us. And we hope that the conditions will improve for tomorrow, when we will be going just to the east, and we'll be actually diving on the slope of Palmyra itself. Excuse me, we're diving on a small knoll, let's say, just off the southeast foot of Palmyra Atoll.
Right. So yeah, it'll be another deeper dive than the work that's been done here before. So it'll be interesting to get a sense of what's there.
So check in, and in the meantime, I guess you could enjoy replay highlights on the website.
That's right.
To get your Okeanos Explorer Deep Sea fix.
Or tune in here. You'll be watching some water column here on the way up if you want.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Good point. Thank you very much. So this is Scott France. We're seeing some really nice ripples in the sediment there. If we need more indication that there's current down here as well.
You can see how they said it changed direction maybe around that rock. That's really
like warping.
Yeah, that's really a cool observation. It gives you a sense of how these things might flow around these boulders.
Cool. And there's a little fish, of course, taunting Bruce on shore. So I'm Scott France, University of Louisiana Lafayette, and we're signing off on the benthic part of our dive for the day.
This is Del Blundensteel from North Carolina State, and we hope to see you all tomorrow.